So my presentation actually follows on quite a few themes that Catherine brought up. So ideas about place, attachment to place, and also about the everyday. And this is very much a kind of a qualitative angle, really. I'm just in this presentation, I'm going to talk about my work and what is the problem that I was looking to solve. Psychogeography is something that deserves a bit of explanation also. And I'm going to talk through a case study, which is about trying to understand why a place has got a collection of an aging population. Then we'll look at the walking interviews and group tours, and finally look at some potential applications and opportunities linking through to GIS. So yeah, I am an early career researcher. I got my PhD in December last year. But I've spent about 15 years working on different built environment projects. I worked in a regeneration team for a decade, and I've used GIS a lot for the work that I've done. And I'd say that with my work, I'm always intrigued by sense of space and sense of place, and how people have got unconscious connections to space and place. So I'd say that I kind of come from a human geography background with a bit of social psychology, and also maybe I'm very interested in arts practice also. Right, so what is the problem I was looking at? Quite simply, it's about, Britain has got an aging population like lots of many European countries, and we have plenty of statistics to show that places that have got aging populations, but how do we actually understand that? How do we get behind the statistics? So this case study is about a place with an aging population. And psychogeography, so this is one definition of psychogeography, which is the study of the precise laws and specific effects on the geographical environment, consciously organized or not, on the emotions and behavior of individuals. So what this was coined by Guy Debord, who was a French philosopher, artist, thinker, and he worked in the 50s and the 60s with a group called Situationist International, and they did group walks and tours around different places trying to understand atmospheres. And coming forward a few decades, but by the 90s, psychogeography moved more towards being a kind of a study of local history and more of kind of like a way of understanding place narrative. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. My approach merges the two in some ways. So this is my case study in statistics. It's a place called Caerleon on the edge of Newport in South Wales. The population hovers around about 8,000 people, and what you'll see on these stats here is that the number of people aged over 65 has increased quite a lot since 2001. It's actually got the largest collection of a concentration rather of older people in any ward of Newport. And Newport's actually a city where where it's got a fairly young population, all things considered. So I was interested in understanding this place on a deeper level. So looking at the architecture, on the left-hand side, you've got a 60s building. This is actually a maisonette, which has got a flat upstairs and one downstairs. And on the right, you've got the centre of the village, which has got some medieval buildings, and also it's got a Roman history. So archaeology and architecture and history are very much a key part of the identity of this place. A little bit on attachment in the Lifecourse. So there's no real way of actually understanding in administrative terms where somebody has lived through their life. In Scotland, there's a thing called the Lothian birth cohort, which charts a group of people through their lives. But to really try and understand why people stay in a certain place, you have to look at people's biographies. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the interview work I did. So I did about 20 interviews, half of which were outdoor walking interviews, and half were what I call walks of the mind, where people use geography as a way of kind of stimulating their memory. So they stimulate a walk that they will have done in the past. So this is just one example of a walk that I went on with an individual. She's in her 70s. So most of the people I interviewed were actually in their 60s or 70s. The eldest person, I think, was 96. And the important thing is the walk is led by the interviewee and not by me. The walks generally last up to about an hour, and again, linking to what Catherine said, the themes were about everyday life. They're about family, work, shopping, transport, and the interviews were, I let people talk about generally what came to mind as they actually walked through a certain place. So moving on to the kind of the group walking element, with all of the interviews that I did, I put together a route which combined elements of their biographies and also a book set in the sort of 1880s, 1890s, which was loosely about Cullinan. And all of the walking route is on a public right of way or a road. I did one event in July 2019 and one in November 2019. So they were both public events that anybody could come to. And I also worked with a performance artist. So on the left, there is the event with the performance artist. On the right, there's the event where one of the interviewees led a segment of the tour. And the responses were really interesting. So going back to the kind of the local history thing, people said that it was good to concentrate on the small, everyday, the individual and the community. So coming forward to GIS, I mapped the walk using Digimap. So this shows a split between the purplish stuff, that's suburbanites, the brown are urbanites, and then you've got a pocket where I've highlighted of people who are hard-pressed living and constrained city dwellers. And it was really interesting to be able to sort of analyse how the place had changed, statistically at least. So one particular street had younger blue-collar workers in 2001, but then hard-pressed ageing workers in 2011. And it helped to theorise why this place has an ageing population. This again is an overlay of the number of people who are aged over 65, and from the stories that came through, I was able to understand that probably the biggest reason why there's an ageing population was because of Newport had a concentration of new industry in the 60s and the 70s. And this larger map here shows the number of properties built after 1945. So I think that the method is very much participatory in people sharing their biographies, and then also the building up these group walking tours. Again, like Catherine said before, this is an opportunity to think again about how we design places. And particularly looking at places from the perspective of the walker, of the pedestrian, because certainly these places are designed around roads, and rather than actually people being able to access community facilities and things. And I think that's probably where I'd like to leave it. Thank you.
One thing I wondered about was you've got a bit of what we might call analytical GIS in there with the map overlays and the classifications, and you've got quite a bit of human geography as well. How do you kind of link the two together? because it, you know, there's lots of potential for great work to do that, but I'd imagine it's also a challenge as well.
Yeah, that's partly why I wanted to present at this conference, really, because I didn't have much of a chance to really use GIS apart from really mapping the interviews and then mapping the overall walk. You know, there's only so much you can do in a PhD, but I would be interested to use these. You know, there's a GPX of the overall group walk. There's a GPX for each of the interviews. I just think there's lots of potential there to kind of interrogate it further. But how we do that is a different question, I think.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see, does the route you take on the physical walks, is that similar to the walk of mind in terms of what people do? Not necessarily specific locations, but the kind of features people see?
I think one of the walks of the mind was a fairly coherent line. You could definitely plot it, but the reality is that it was kind of set in the 1950s and 60s, and so I also used historic maps a lot through Digimap, so that I could kind of back up the stories that people were sharing with me. So, you know, that was a time when you can't really link statistics. I mean, one of the things I did investigate was a project at Edinburgh University called Mobility, Mood, Place, where they tried to kind of reconstruct green space, how it had been over the last kind of 7 decades, but it was very, very complicated.
We've had another question come in from Jacques Bond. Did you engage with local historians when designing your walk?
Yes, yeah, I did. I read plenty of books, and I also worked with the Civic Society. So one of the people who guided part of the walk was the chair of the local Civic Society. Yeah, I'd say that I worked with quite a few people who knew a lot about history. I mean, the important thing to stress is just that the actual line that I took is just one line through that place, but it was informed by kind of outside of myself. It was informed based on this book called The Hill of Dreams, and it was also informed by what other people shared with me. That you could, and that's the article that is in the Design Commission for Wales, the Places for Life publication, kind of gives some suggestions of how to find that place narrative from any other place. You have to be open-minded about what might have shaped a place in the past, in order, and the present,